Hi everyone, here's the Book Chemist once again. Today I'm reviewing Playground by Richard Powers, an author with whom I've had a fairly turbulent relationship in the last few years. I first read the Overstory and loved it. I thought it was an amazing, emotional, engaging, complex novel, a real masterpiece. It was great. Afterwards I read Bewilderment, the novel he wrote after the Overstory, and I actually wasn't too impressed. It's obviously beautifully written and it's very emotional and engaging, but it also felt a little bit cheap perhaps. It felt as if maybe its themes, its plot developments were maybe pulling at a few easy strings in the reader's heart, what with the child who's so enamored with nature that he can't cope with the brokenness of the world, and the oppressive president. Even though some of the Bewilderment's prophecies have since become a reality just in the last couple of weeks, at the time I thought it maybe a little bit of a cheap shot. Later on I read The Goldbug Variations, which is one of Powers' early novels, or at least much earlier than these last two. And when I was studying American literature, when I was doing my PhD, Goldbug Variations was very much mentioned frequently alongside the other great, difficult American novels of the 90s and the noughties. Infinite Jest, Don DeLillo's Underworld, Fallman's works, and so on and so forth. I kind of detested Goldbug Variations, I must say. It's definitely a virtuosistic novel, and it would definitely appeal to fans of David Foster Wallace, and I say that in the most positive terms possible. They just share very much a similar approach, a similar attitude, a similar treatment of their subject matter. But I found it irksome, puritanical. Its characters felt empty and exaggerated and cold and brainy and not very much like believable human beings at all. It's also a novel that takes issue with rock and roll music and monster movies, two of my favorite things, and has lots to say about the beauty and the sanctity of the hard sciences, which always left me a little cold. Sorry. However, later on I heard Powers talk at an event in Bristol where he was presenting Playground, and I was quite impressed, which is by no means a given. I've gone to quite a few readings and literary events where a writer whose work I'd really appreciated then turned out to be a little bit of a twat, perhaps. I think especially recent times have shown us, and really we didn't need recent times to learn this, but some writers who can have a really clear insight into the human condition, can write beautiful prose, can be really insightful characterizators, or can have really a great access into human psyche, can also be flawed, obtuse, even evil people. I never thought that Powers was gonna be evil by any stretch of the imagination, but I thought he might come across as a little sanctimonious and a little prophetic. Far from it. He was very down to earth, very wise, talk about his work beautifully without sounding in any way, full of himself. It was just a great talk. My wife would also had misgivings about Bewilderment, read Playground, and she thought it was great, so I thought, well, let's give it a try. Probably the cheapest and easiest way to review Playground is to say that it is to the ocean what the Overstory was to trees. It's a story about a few characters who, through in different ways, become enamored with the natural world and with the ocean itself specifically, and whose lives are then influenced by this passion, who spend their lives engaging with the ocean in different and various ways and becoming entangled with the natural world and deeply connected with it. Powers, for all that he's clearly as versed in the humanities and in literary history as anybody out there, also writes with a scientist side, especially in the way he looks at the natural world. He looks at the enigmas of nature, of life, as something to be marveled at for their own sake, as something to be explained and decoded, and something to be interpreted, as this impulse seems to be almost indistinguishable from the playful impulse at the heart of all life, this great movement of evolution that created all life forms and that is still ongoing and still shaping our universe. Powers speaks out somewhat against the scientific tenet against anthropomorphism in the book, this idea that we shouldn't assume that animals have the same emotions and wishes as humans. That's definitely true, but he also believes, or at least his characters believe, that that might have separated us from animals in a way that makes it easier to exploit them, destroy their habitat, kill them. And he also, at the same time, he looks at nature as something that is not there to be exploited or tamed, but is something to be marveled at and be curious about, even while he realizes that human curiosity can only exist because of the technological and social evolution that led to the present day and also caused the destruction of the natural world, compromised so many environments, and led to the extinction of so many species. There's something almost religious about the way in which Powers marvels at the beauty of the natural world and at the sanctity of life. And to me, he does come across as a very puritanical author in the way he speaks about the sanctity and the importance of all these pursuits and these forces that regulate the universe. Perhaps for this reason, and this is obviously extremely endearing, the way he the passion and the love he shows for the natural world. Maybe for this reason his characters tend to come across as fairly high-strung, righteous, easily offended. The trio of protagonists at the heart of Playground reminded me quite a bit of the trio of protagonists at the heart of Goldback Variations. They are definitely indignant at the depths of human folly, and they are convinced about the holiness of their individual pursuits, of poetry, of art, of technological advancement, and beyond. A lot of Powers' characters come across maybe as science monks, is what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying it to make fun of them or to dismiss them, it's just something that I've maybe noticed in his novels. Now that I'm so far into the review, however, I have to say that comparing Playground to the Overstory is probably unfair and fairly pointless. Playground is not just the Overstory with a different setting. It doesn't just play the same game, switching the ocean for the trees. The Overstory has a fairly rigid structure. It's very much a book structured around the lives of these parallel characters, entwining, separating, whereas Playground is much more playful, if you pardon the pun, in its narrative structure, in the way it presents the stories of its various protagonists. It's very much concerned with games as the basic way in which human beings interact with each other and their environment, and in which the human intellect evolves to ever new heights. And it's concerned almost in parallel with the rise of machines and of artificial intelligence, with the dangers that this poses for human pursuits and for the world, dangers that maybe we can't even predict yet, potentially. It obviously feels very topical for that reason. I work in academic publishing, and the way in which AI is going to change the world of academic writing, scholarly pursuit, is something I hear about every day. And part of the genius of the novel is certainly the way it blends together these various strands, these various concerns: the ocean, playing games, AI, the lives of all these people. It blends them together in an intricate tapestry, but in a way that feels very natural. The stories never feel like they clash with each other. While I did say that Powers comes across as a bit puritanical to me, it's also true that the difference in attitudes between what I felt was the arrogance of Goldback Variations and his attitude in Playground is stark. He is aware of the very real human needs that technology is answering and it's addressing, at the same time as he's aware that these things are causing great devastation on the world and causing immense suffering and misery both to humans and to the natural landscape. He is aware that a lot of this devastation is the product of the great wave of human progress, but there is also a feeling and an awareness that this doesn't have to happen in a way that causes so much death and loss and misery, that we can still do something that will mitigate this destruction and will address it. It's a book that obviously strikes an apocalyptic note because that's the times we live in, times of immense devastation, but doesn't do so in a way that's maudlin or self-indulgent. Far from it. In fact, I think it's very brave in spite of the horrors that it describes and faces. I think Playground is a fantastic novel. It's a book about a world that's not so much on the brink of disaster, but midway through it, very much. That talks about the acts of humanity, the small acts of beauty that we can still do in these times on a small and large scale, and the difference that they can make on the lives of so many creatures, humans, animals across the world. Part of its genius is due to its narrative structure, to some of the games, again, that it plays, but it's impossible to talk about that without spoiling the novel. I wasn't as lucky as you. The interviewer did spoil it in that interview in Bristol, so I won't play the same trick on you. I'll just encourage you to go out and read it, because I think it's great, especially if you enjoyed the overstory. I'm sure you're going to love this. And I look forward to hearing what you thought. I was surprised in the comments to my review of the overstory that quite a few people didn't seem to like the novel. I was quite surprised because I think that one is really compelling, but then I don't like some others of his books, so who am I to speak? Thanks as always for watching. I really appreciate it. Thanks to my patrons for supporting the channel. That's always awesome. Bye, everybody.